Good morning everyone. Welcome to the video tutorial of class 6 science. So students, today we will do the revision of chapter number 5, separation of substances from mixtures. Okay, so we will start the revising this chapter by taking some examples. So as we all know that every day we separate a number of substances from their mixture. So let's take some examples. Whenever your mother makes tea, she always uses a strainer. This is known as a strainer. So whenever she makes tea, she always uses this strainer. Can you tell me that why is she doing this? I think all of you know that before pouring the tea into the cup, why she always uses this strainer? Because she separate useful component from the non-useful component. So here the tea is the useful component because we drink tea, and tea leaves are the non-useful component because we don't eat tea leaves and we usually throw them away. So this strainer is used to separate useful component from the non-useful component by the filtration. Okay. So this is the first example in which we have separated the useful component from the non-useful component. Here the useful component is tea and the non-useful components are tea leaves. Right. So you have understood this. Okay, so now we will look at some more examples. Okay. So have you seen this at your home? Do you know that why this continuous stirring of curd is taking place here? You know that? Because we get makhan and lassi by the continuous stirring of this curd. Okay. So here by continuous stirring of curd or by continuous churning of curd, we get makhan and lassi, and here both these are the useful components. So by the stirring of curd or by the churning of curd, we get two useful components. Okay. Here both the components are useful because we usually eat makhan and we also drink lassi also. So both of these are the useful components. Because we want to eat makhan also and we want to drink lassi also. So here we get both the useful components. Okay, by the churning of curd or by the continuous stirring of curd. Okay, so now you have understood this, right? So now we will take some more examples. What is this? Okay, do you know that? This is a wheat plant. Okay, so this is a plant from which we get wheat flour. So these are the grains of the wheat flour and this is known as the stalk, right? These are the grains and this is known as the stalk. So these are the grains from which we get the wheat flour. Okay, and this is the stalk, which is mostly useless, right? So after harvesting, what we do is we separate these grains from the stalk, right? So after harvesting, we separate these grains from and these stalks. Okay, and we get wheat flour from these wheat grains, and these stalks are generally useless for us, but these are very useful for animals and we feed the straw to the animals. So it is used as animal feed. Okay. So this is one more example in which we separated the grains from the stalk. Okay, so I think all of you have understood this also, right? Now let's take one more example, right? So this is the example in which cotton fiber is separated from cotton seeds. So we have already done this in our chapter number 3, that is fiber to fabric. I think all of you remember this, right? So this is the process by which cotton fiber is separated from the cotton seeds by the process of ginning. So the process by which the cotton fiber is separated from the cotton seed, that is known as ginning, right? So this is also one example in which separation is taking place. Okay, so what is this? This is actually a bowl of vegetables, and your mother wants you to eat these veggies or these vegetables. But if you don't like some of the vegetables which are given to you to eat, so what will you do? You pick up those veggies which you don't like and eat rest of them. So what you will do, you separate the non-tasty food from the tasty food. So this is also a process of separation, right? In which you picked up those veggies which you don't like and you eat those veggies which you like. So this is also a separation method. So there are so many methods of separation, and there are so many reasons for which separation is done, right? So let's discuss those reasons. So now the topic is, why do we separate substances? So first is to separate harmful substances from a mixture. So generally we separate the stones, insects from the pulses and rice which we have to cook, and before cooking we have to separate these harmful substances from the pulses and the rice. Okay. Whenever we go to the market and we buy these pulses or rice and we cook these rice or pulses, so we always see that there are many stones and insects are present in them. So before cooking we have to remove these harmful substances or these harmful impurities. So whenever we cook these pulses or these rice, so first of all we pick up these stones and insects from the pulses or rice, and after washing we cook these pulses or rice, right? So what we have done, we have separated the harmful substances from a mixture. Okay, now the next reason is to separate non-useful substances from a mixture, and the example is straining tea leaves from the tea. So we have already seen that the tea leaves are useless for us, and we separate these tea leaves from the tea by the use of strainer, right? So here we have done separation from the non-useful substances and from the useful substances. So here we have separated the non-useful substances from a mixture. Now the next reason is, we always separate two useful components if we want to use them separately. For example, separating lassi and butter by churning curd. So we have seen this example also. We have separated lassi and butter, and both are the useful components because we want to drink lassi also and we want to use butter also, right? So here we have separated two useful components. So I think all of you understood that why do we separate substances? To separate harmful substances from a mixture, to separate non-useful substances from a mixture, or we also separate two useful components if we want to use them separately, right? So now the list is given here, in which 3 separation processes are given, and the purpose for which we do the separation is also given and what do we do with the separated components. Okay, so the first is separate stones from rice, and the purpose for which we do the separation is to remove the impurities or harmful components. And what do we do with the separated components? We throw away the impurities, or we throw away the non-useful separated components, right? Now the next is churning curd to obtain butter. So here the purpose is to separate 2 useful but useful components, to separate 2 different but useful components. So here we separated 2 different components, but both of them are useful. So what do we do with the separated components? We use both the components. Now the next is separate tea leaves. So here the purpose is to remove non-useful components. So here 2 components are given, out of which one is useful and one is non-useful. So we throw away the solid component because the solid component is non-useful, and the liquid component, that is tea, is useful. So now we know that there are different methods of separation, right? So now we will quickly take a look on the different methods, and now we will discuss them one by one. So there are different methods of separation like hand picking, threshing, winnowing, sieving, evaporation, sedimentation, decantation and filtration. So now we will discuss them one by one. So the first method of separation which we have to study is hand picking. So what is this? This is actually rice grains and impurities. This is a mixture of rice grains and impurities also. So what we have to do is, before cooking these rice grains, what we have to do is we have to pick up the impurities by our hand, and after that we have to wash these rice, and after that we will cook them. So we have mostly seen this almost every day at our home also, because our mothers usually do this before cooking the rice. Okay, so we have seen this almost every day. So this is called as hand picking. When we separate 2 components by our hand, so the process is known as hand picking. Here we separate the rice grains from the impurities, and the process is known as hand picking. So this is a very simple process. So what we have understood is, like pulses, rice have impurities such as stones, dirt, insects and other grains, and we have to remove these stones, dirt, insects and other grains with our hand, and the process is known as hand picking. Okay. So it is basically a separation method used to remove the unwanted or harmful substances from a mixture by using our hand. So hand picking is a separation method which is used to remove the unwanted or harmful substances from a mixture by using our hand. Okay, so this is a very simple method. Okay. Now let's answer this question for me. Can hand picking be used to separate all substances from a mixture? So before answering this question, let's take a look. This is a mixture of salt and sugar. So tell me, can you separate the mixture of salt and sugar by just hand picking? The answer is obviously no, because the 2 components given here are very small in size, and it is obviously impossible to separate them by just hand picking. So the answer is obviously no. Okay, so now we know that when hand picking can be used. Hand picking can be used when the size of the impure substance is large or the quantity of impure substance is less, right? So these are the two conditions when hand picking can be used. Because if the size of the impure substance is large, like the mixture of salt and sugar, so it is impossible to separate them by just hand picking. And the second is the quantity of impure substance is less. Okay, if I say that there are tons and tons of rice and this rice is full of impurities, so can you just remove these impurities by only hand picking? No, this is just impossible. So now we know that if the size of impure substance is small or the large quantity of impurity is present, so the hand picking cannot be used. Okay, now we will discuss other methods of separation, right? Okay, now we already know that after harvesting the grains are separated from the stalk, and these grains are used to eat, like as wheat grains. Okay, and the stalks are used to feed animals, right? But now we have to discuss that how can we separate these grains from the stalk of the plant. So the process by which the grains are separated from the stalk of the plant is known as threshing. So the process which is used for separating grains from the stalk is known as threshing. So there are two processes by which these grains are separated from the stalks. So first is the stalks are beaten manually. You can see here that the farmer is beating these stalks on the slab, that is a stone slab, and the farmer is beating the stalks, okay, to remove the grains from the stalks. Okay, and here you can see that the grains are separated from the stalks. They are falling down, right? So on a smaller scale this can be done, but on a larger scale we have to use the threshers, or farmers have to use the threshers. So if we have tons and tons of stalks and we have to remove the grains from them, so it cannot be done manually, so we have to use threshers for that, right? So it can be done by two processes. Like first is it can be done manually on a smaller scale, but on a larger scale threshers can be used, because threshers are the machine and threshers can easily separate the grains from the stalk, right? Okay, so now I think you have understood this. Okay, now let's move forward. So the next method of separation is winnowing. Okay, so let's take a closer look on this. So what is this? This is a wheat plant. Okay, and in threshing we separate the grains from the stalk of the wheat plant. Okay, but in winnowing we have to separate the grains from the fodder or from the husk. Okay, so this can be done by the process of winnowing. So in winnowing we separate the grains from this husk or from this fodder. Okay, so now can you define that what is winnowing? So winnowing is a method of separation used to separate heavier and lighter components of a mixture by wind or by blowing air, and it is used by the farmers to separate husk from the grains. So in threshing we separate the grains from the stalk, but in winnowing we separate the grains from the husk. So now we will understand the process of winnowing by this diagram. So what you can see here is a woman is standing on a raised platform, and she is holding this container in a tilted position, and she is allowing the grains to fall down. Okay, so now what will happen in this position? So if the wind is blowing in this direction, so what will happen? The lighter particle will be carried away by the wind, and the heavier particle will settle down and form the heap. So by this process we separate the lighter particle, that is husk, from the heavier particle, that is grains. So this is a very easy process by which we separate the lighter particle from the heavier particle. Okay, so I think all of you have understood that what is winnowing and what is threshing, right? So let me clear the difference between the threshing and winnowing. So in winnowing we have separated the grains from the husk, but in threshing we have separated the grains from the stalk, right? So now we have understood the difference between the threshing and the winnowing. So in threshing we have separated the grains from the stalk of the plant, but in winnowing we have separated the grains from the husk, that is also known as the covering of the grains. All right. Okay, so now you have understood the clear difference between the threshing and winnowing, right? So the next method of separation which we have to study is sieving. Okay, and what is sieving? This is sieving. Okay, so you have seen your mother doing this almost every day, okay, before making chapati for you, right? So can you tell me what is she doing? She is actually removing the coarse particles of wheat, which is also known as wheat bran, from the wheat flour. And why is she doing this? She is doing this so as to obtain the fine flour for making chapatis for you, right? So when the wheat flour is put in the sieve and the sieve is moved back and forth, okay, so repeatedly, so the fine particles of flour passes through the small holes of the sieve and collect in the vessel, right? So the bigger particles of wheat bran do not pass through the holes of the sieve, and they are left behind in the sieve. And in this way wheat flour is separated into wheat bran and fine flour, and the fine flour is used to make chapatis, right? So what basically sieving is? Sieving is a simple technique for separating particles of different sizes. Sieving is used when components of a mixture have different sizes, right? Why I am saying so is because suppose your mother is sieving this atta with the help of this sieve, so the impurities which are larger than the size of this atta or this wheat flour is remain in the sieve, which are larger than the size of this wheat flour, right? So sieving can only be used when the particles are of different sizes, right? When the separating particles are of different sizes. You can see here also the larger sieve is used to separate the larger soil particles or the stone particles from this soil. So the finer soil particles will pass through the sieve, and the larger particles and the impurities will remain in the sieve. They will remain here only, right? You can see here also this type of sieving or this type of sieve is used at the construction site to remove the larger stone particles from the sand. Okay, here the larger stone particles remain in the sieve and the fine particles of sand will pass through the sieve. So you can understood that sieving is used only when the particles are of different sizes, right? Okay, so now we will study about two more methods of separation: sedimentation and decantation. So we can study them together. They are very simple, right? So here we have rice full of impurities. Okay, so earlier what we did, we separate these impurities by hand picking. But now in this case, what I did, I put some water in this rice bowl, and what I did, I left this bowl undisturbed for some time. So what I observe is the impurities will float on the water. You have already seen this at your home also, when your mother washed the rice before cooking. So what will happen here is the rice will settle down at the bottom of the container and the impurities will float on the water. So this process of separating the mixture, where the impurities will float on the top and the rice grains will settle down, is known as sedimentation. So when the heavier component in a mixture settles down after water is added to it, the process is known as sedimentation. So here the heavier component is rice which settle down, and the lighter components are the impurities which float on the surface of the water. So the process is known as sedimentation. So now we will see what is decantation. So decantation is a process in which water or any other liquid above the sediment is removed or poured out without disturbing the sediment. That is known as decantation. So in this case we are removing water, and with the water we are also removing the impurities present. So here we are removing the impurities or the liquid without disturbing the sediments. Here the sediments are the rice grains. So without disturbing the sediments, we are removing the liquid along with the impurities, and the process is known as decantation. I hope you have understood this. This is sedimentation and this is decantation. Okay. So what is sedimentation? When the heavier components in a mixture settles down after water is added to it, the process is known as sedimentation. And what is decantation? The process in which water or any other liquid above the sediment is removed or poured out without disturbing the sediment is called as decantation. And it is also used to separate two immiscible liquids, oil and water. So with the help of this process, we can also separate the oil and water. We will now look at the method of sedimentation and decantation by another example. Okay. So here we have a glass of water. What I did was I added some soil or some mud in it. Okay, and what I observed was soil will settle down at the bottom of this glass after some time. Okay, so this is actually sedimentation. The sediments settle down at the bottom and the liquid and the sediments has been separated. So this is known as sedimentation. So next, so now I will take one another glass, and without disturbing Without disturbing the sediments, I will pour the liquid in the another glass. Now what will happen? The soil particle or the mud particle and the liquid has been separated. So here what we can see is soil is separated here, but the water still has finer impurities in it. But this separation of soil particles and the liquid is known as decantation. So here soil particles has separated, but the water still has finer impurities. Can you see these finer impurities? Now what you will do? We will put a filter paper over a glass and we will allow this liquid to pass through this filter paper, and this is what you will get. You will again get the pure water. So do you know what do we call this process? This process is known as filtration. So let's take a look once again. This is sedimentation. Here the soil particles settle down after some time. Then by pouring out this liquid, we separate this soil and this water. So this is known as decantation. To remove these finer impurities, we pass this water through this filter paper, and this is known as filtration. Okay, I hope you have understood all the three processes very well. Now look at filtration in more detail. So filtration is a method for separating insoluble solid from a liquid by passing it through a medium, often filter paper. Why we are saying the insoluble solid? This is because suppose you have a glass of water and you have mixed sugar in it. So can you separate this sugar and water by using filter paper? No. You cannot. You can only separate the insoluble solid or the insoluble solute from the solvent, right? By passing it through the filter paper, right? So that's why we are using the word insoluble here. Filtration is used to separate pulp and seed from the juice. It is also used to separate cheese or paneer from milk. So here is a diagram and you can see the filter paper here. So what you can do is you can pass the liquid from this filter paper, and what you will get is you will get a clear filtrate. Okay, this is known as filtrate. You will get a clear liquid which is known as filtrate. So I hope you have understood this. Okay, let's move forward. Now the next method of separation which we have to study is evaporation. All of you know about evaporation. What is evaporation? Evaporation is the process in which a liquid gets converted into its vapor. This evaporation is also used as a method of separation, right? So I think you have never heard about this. So now here we will see that where we can use this process evaporation to separate the components. Okay. So evaporation can be used to separate solids dissolved in a liquid. I told you that the mixture of salt and water or the mixture of sugar and water cannot be separated by filtration. So this process is often used to separate salt from salt water or seawater. Okay, so these types of mixtures can be separated by evaporation. You all know that seawater contains a lot of salt, right? So let's see that how can we separate these salt from this seawater. So to separate salt from seawater is allowed to stand in shallow pits. Water gets heated by sunlight and slowly turns into water vapor through evaporation. So these are shallow pits, and seawater is allowed to stand for few days in shallow pits. So what will happen? In a few days, the water evaporates completely, leaving behind the solid, which is salt. Okay. Then common salt is obtained from this mixture of salt by further purification. Okay. So we will get the common salt by purifying this. Okay. Because this salt contains some impurities also. So what is done here? Here seawater is allowed to stand in shallow pits, and water gets heated by the sunlight and slowly turns into water vapor through evaporation. And in a few days the water evaporates completely, leaving behind the solid salts. These are the salt pits. Okay. These are the salt piles. Okay. And these are the shallow pits. Okay, so the common salt is then obtained from this mixture of salt by further purification. So I hope you have understood this. Now let's move forward. So there are some instances where one method is not sufficient to separate the components given in the mixture. So here we use more than one method of separation. So now we will look at some instances where we can use more than one method of separation. So we will understand this with the help of this diagram. Suppose you have a mixture of salt and sand. So what you will do is you will put the salt and sand in a beaker or in a glass, and you will put water into it. So what will happen is the sand will settle down and the salt will dissolve in water, right? After that, what you will do? You will decantate this liquid. You have already studied about decantation, right? So what you will do is you can decantate this solution, and by this you can remove the sand from this water, but salt is already present in it. So this is not the purified water. But now you need to separate salt from this water, right? So what you will do? So here we have a beaker which has salt and water. So what you will do is you will put the solution into this kettle, salt plus water solution in this kettle, right? And you will turn on the heat. Then when you will turn on the heat, the water present in this beaker evaporate. And when this evaporated water come in contact with this metal plate which has ice cubes in over it, you know it's really cold. So when these vapors come in contact with this metal plate, so the process of condensation will happen and the water vapor get converted into liquid. And what we are left behind in this kettle is salt. So we have separated the mixture of salt and water also. Salt is left behind in this kettle, and we have collected the water here. Okay. So we have separated the mixture of salt, sand and water by using more than one method of separation. Okay. So sand is separated from water by sedimentation and decantation, whereas salt is separated from water by evaporation and condensation. I hope you have understood this. If you haven't understood this, so let's revise it once again. So okay guys, let's revise evaporation and condensation once again. Evaporation is the process in which the liquid is converted into vapors. Alright, and condensation is a process in which these vapors gets converted into liquid. Okay. So when the temperature is increased, so liquids gets converted into vapors and the process is called as evaporation. And when the temperature is decreased, so the vapors will get converted into liquid and the process is known as condensation. So now what you have to do is you have to do an activity for me. So what you have to do is you have to take a beaker, put some water in it, and you have to add some sugar in it and stir it continuously. So after dissolving, add some more sugar and try to dissolve it. After some time you will notice that when you will add sugar again, you will not be able to dissolve any more sugar. And the crystals of sugar will settle down at the bottom of the container. Okay. So this solution in which you will not be able to add any more sugar, that solution is known as saturated solution. So you have to do this activity and you have to check that how many spoons of sugar you can dissolve in 1 glass of water. Okay. And one more activity, that how many spoons of salt you can dissolve in 1 glass of water. Okay, so you have to do both the activities at your home. So now we know that what is the saturated solution. A solution is said to be saturated if it cannot dissolve more of the substance or solute in it. Okay, it cannot dissolve any more solute into it. So this is a saturated solution. More of a substance can be dissolved in a solution by heating it. So if you want to dissolve more of a substance in it, so you have to heat it. Okay. So by heating you will be able to dissolve more of the substance. Okay. And now one more thing which is very important is water dissolve different amount of soluble substances in it, and that is why water is known as a universal solvent, right? So now we have completed this chapter. Okay, so you have to do both the activities at your home, and I will ask about your observation in our Zoom class. Okay, so you have to do both the activities. So this is all about this chapter, separation of substances. Here we have studied about different methods of separation like hand picking, winnowing, thrashing, filtration, sedimentation, decantation, evaporation, condensation. Okay, and we have also discussed about the saturated solutions. So I hope you have understood all the methods of separation of substances. Thank you and see you in the next video.